Tell how the angels in chorus sang as they welcomed his birth. Glory to God in the highest, peace and good tidings to earth. Tell me the story of Jesus.
Hello, and welcome to The Detectives. Today we are going to investigate a case which is called A Boy's Picnic. It's case number 1 in our series of investigations into what Jesus did, and when we have learned the facts, we will ask ourselves the question, like all good detectives do, how did he do that? In order to understand the story, we have to imagine that we are living in the days of Jesus 2,000 and more years ago in the land of Judea. It was a very dry and dusty land. Villages and houses were built in a very simple way. If you were rich, then your house was built of stone and had a flat roof. But if you weren't rich, if you were poor, then your house was probably built out of mud bricks with mud put over the top for a plaster. The roads in the village had no pavements. They weren't tarred, and people dressed in a very funny way, with clothes that came right down to their feet, and nobody wore trousers because they hadn't been invented in those days. If you wanted to travel anywhere, you had to walk. These were the days when there were no buses, no trains, no taxis, no planes, no cars. There weren't even any bicycles. You walked everywhere, and your sandaled feet got hot and dry and dusty. Unless, of course, you had a donkey, in which case you were able to go for a ride, and you didn't feel quite so hot and tired when you arrived. Let me tell you about this man, Jesus. He was the most wonderful man who has ever lived. Now, we don't know what he looked like because he lived before they had invented cameras, and there's no photograph of him. Many of the books that tell us about his stories and about his life will present him as having had blonde hair and blue eyes. But because Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, and because his mother was Jewish, it is more likely that he had dark hair, darker skin, and dark eyes. We imagine, therefore, that he looked like this man, and that is how we are going to see him in this story. He was born in Bethlehem, but he was brought up in Nazareth, and his stepfather Joseph was a carpenter. So it is probable that Jesus, as a boy, learned how to make furniture from wood and be a carpenter. When he grew up, he began to teach people about God, and people loved to hear what he had to say. His stories were simple and straightforward, and everybody loved listening to him. And when he spoke, he touched their hearts. On this particular day I want to tell you about, this boy, we don't know his name, had decided he wanted to go to listen to Jesus. He had heard that Jesus of Nazareth was not far away teaching, and he says to his mum, I want to go off to find where Jesus is to listen to him. So his mum says, that's fine. When I get home, I will make you a picnic and you can go and find where he is. And she makes the boy a picnic of 5 small bread rolls and 2 fish. Jesus had been teaching and he was tired. So he got into a boat belonging to some of his disciples. A disciple is somebody who believed in Jesus and followed him, and he crossed over the lake to the other side. But the people who had been listening to him saw him in the boat crossing over the lake, and they followed. And when Jesus arrived, there was a crowd of people already waiting for him. They had walked around the lake to where they knew he would land the boat. And although Jesus was tired, he was happy to teach them again. Not only did he teach them, and people who came to listen to him on that occasion were so many you could hardly count them. In fact, the story tells us there were 5,000 men plus women and children. Not only did Jesus teach them, but he also healed some of them. He touched them and made the deaf to hear, and he made the blind to see. And sometimes he just spoke to them, and they were made better just by his word. And the people that had been there spent all day in the hot sun, and they didn't notice that they were hungry, and they didn't notice that the day was getting to an end. Philip comes to the Lord and he says to him, Jesus, Master, send the people away. This is a desert place. We have nothing to feed them with. Send them away into the villages to buy food for themselves. But Jesus says, no, you give them something to eat. Now Philip says, how can we do that, Lord? Just think how much money we would need to feed all these people. We don't have that amount of money. Send them away to buy their own food. But Jesus says to him, no, Philip, you go and find out how much food there is, and you feed them. So the disciples go off to find what food they have. And guess who they found? You're right. They found our little friend with his picnic. Andrew is the disciple who goes up to him and he says to him, do you have a picnic? And he says, yes, I do. He said, would you give your picnic to Jesus? Just imagine how proud you would be if somebody asked you to do that. If somebody said to you that the person who'd been teaching you and thrilling you all day long with his stories and his message had said, can I have your picnic? Our little friend, this little boy, thought to himself, I'm going to give my picnic to Jesus. And he brought it to Jesus. Jesus says to his disciples, make everybody sit down on the ground, ready to eat. And so they did. And then he took the boy's picnic. Remember, there were 5 rolls, and there were 2 cooked fish that his mother had given him for his picnic. And Jesus looked up to heaven and said, thank you for the food. It's what Christians call saying grace. And it's always a good thing to remember that whatever or wherever you have bought your food, whatever supermarket it may have been, ultimately it's God who gives us the food because he sends the rain and the sunshine upon the food that we eat. And having given thanks for the food, Jesus began to break the bread and the fish into little pieces and put it into baskets ready to give to the people. His 12 disciples picked up the food and took it around and handed it to them one by one. And they tucked in and they ate the food, the fish and the bread until they were full. Just think for a minute. How many people did Jesus feed? And with how many bread rolls? And how many fish? That's right, over 5,000, because there were 5,000 men plus women and children. And when they had finished, there were 12 baskets of food left over. And we ask ourselves the question, how did he do that? How did Jesus manage to take 5 bread rolls and 2 cooked fish, and break it into enough pieces to feed over 5,000 people and still have 12 baskets left over at the end? How did he do that? And the answer is very simple. He did that because although he was a man, and although people called him Jesus of Nazareth, he was also God. And God can do anything he wants to. And so Jesus, as God, broke 5 bread rolls and 2 fish into enough small pieces to feed thousands of people. And they were amazed. And this little boy spent many months afterwards with people coming up to him in one village or another saying, "Did Jesus really take your picnic? And tell me again, how many bread rolls? Only 5. And how many fish? Only 2. And he fed over 5,000 people." And the little boy says, "Yes, he did. I know because I was there." As Jesus did wonderful things like this, people began to say, "Who is he?" And the answer was, Jesus of Nazareth is the Son of God. I believe he is. Do you?
Fasting alone in the desert, tell of the days that are past, how for our sins he was tempted, yet was triumphant at last. Tell of the years of his labor, tell of the sorrow he bore. He was despised and afflicted, homeless, rejected, and poor. Tell me the story of Jesus, write on my heart every word. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that ever was heard. Tell of the cross where they nailed him, writhing in anguish and pain. Tell of the grave where they laid him, tell how he liveth again. Love in that story so tender, clearer than ever I see. Say, let me weep while you whisper, love paid the ransom for me. Tell me the story of Jesus, write on my heart every word. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that